Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 31st edition of Sup in Science and our final session for the winter semester. My name is Preeti and I'm one of the organizers for this event. Before we begin, we acknowledge that McGill University is on land which long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst Indigenous peoples, including the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee nations. We acknowledge and thank the diverse Indigenous peoples whose footsteps have marked this territory on which peoples of the world now gather. I'm going to turn the microphone to our host, Professor John Sticks, the Associate Dean of Research, to introduce the speakers for today.
Thank you, Preeti. It's great to see everybody here today on this week of Sup in Science. And we have some great speakers today. Professor Margaret Kalacska in the Department of Geography, Professor Tami Pereg-Barnea in the Department of Physics, Professor Jérôme Waldispühl in the School of Computer Science, and not last but not least, Mr. Nicholas Vieira, a student who is in the Department of Physics. So the way it's going to work today is that each presenter will talk for 4 or 5 minutes and in quick succession, boom, 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 boom. And then once the speakers have finished, we'll go into a series of breakout rooms, and each speaker will be in one breakout room, and you, the students, can circulate amongst the breakout rooms if you want to visit this presenter first and then another presenter and so forth. So hold your questions for now, store them in your memory banks, and then you can have a discussion with the presenter in the breakout rooms. So it's my great pleasure to introduce the first speaker, Professor Margaret Kalacska. We know each other quite well. We've talked about all sorts of cool research projects together. Margaret is a remote sensing expert and applied to many different issues, but I think I would say your focus right now is on environmental issues, maybe, Margaret. It's my great pleasure to introduce you. Yes. And over to you.
Thanks, John. Sorry, I'm having a bit of trouble controlling the screen. There we go. So good morning, everyone, and thank you for the introduction, John. And as John mentioned, I'm from Department of Geography, and I'm going to be talking to you about Earth observation from satellites and drones with a very specific focus in this case on environmental applications. So if we think about what is the purpose of Earth observation, I like to sort of remind myself often just to make sure that we're really in tune with what this technology can do. And this is one of my favorite quotes, which says that it's to help society to observe and monitor the Earth, to enable predictions and understand interactions between society and the Earth systems, and to inform decision makers and citizens about scenarios and consequences of political and economic decisions regarding the Earth. And we can also think about that how these tools can actually help us work towards the various different sustainable development goals. Now, the ones I put here on the screen are the ones that are probably the most relevant for the applications I'm going to show you today. So we have clean energy, climate action, life below water, life on land, and industry innovation and infrastructure. But you can also think about how these tools can help answer questions towards many of the other goals as well. Now, Earth observation has a long history, and there's a myriad of different kinds of satellites in orbit that are imaging our Earth every day. Each one has a different capability and a different way to see the Earth. This is really just a very small fraction of the ones in orbit, and you can see that they are also managed by many different countries. And so this really gives us a full picture of what is actually happening almost any place on the Earth at any given time. Now, of course, technology has also improved such that we actually have many different kinds of UAVs or drones, as they're called, that citizens themselves can use and actually take outside and image areas that they are interested in seeing. And this is actually a cover of Time magazine where each of those dots was one drone that was flown simultaneously. So there's almost 1,000 of them that were used to create this time cover. And this technology has increased so quickly in terms of what they can do and their ease of use and the kind of information that we can get from them. So it's really these two scales that I want to talk to you about today. And in my lab, here are some of the most recent types of examples that we work on. So we look at land cover change. We've been looking at both terrestrial and aquatic diversity, thermal applications, and this is more in an urban context, so looking at clean energy initiatives and heat loss from different facilities as a way to really precisely understand what is happening and how those facilities can be made more efficient. We also look at the impact of climate change. And we have a few sort of larger initiatives where we develop actually the tools and the technology themselves. So whether it's integrating new sensors on these unmanned aerial vehicles or developing new ways to represent the Earth. In this example, I have a three-dimensional reconstruction of one of our sites. And so we work in different places around the world. So each of those dots represents one of our recent projects that we're working on collaboratively. And depending on the scale, we could be looking at really local scale, in which case we'd be using those sort of unmanned aerial vehicles, or in cases for aquatic applications, a slight version of those types of sensors. We work with manned aircraft for sort of larger scale efforts, or from satellite for those regional scale assessments. And the two red triangles are going to show you the locations of two very brief case studies I'd like to share with you. So the first one is from Brazil. And in this case, we used a very specific type of satellite called a CubeSat. And this photograph here is what one of those satellites look like. So there's over 100 of them in orbit, and they image our planet every single day. And they're about the size of a milk carton. So they're a much more efficient form factor, and that allows the manufacturers to have large constellations of these in orbit, rather than relying on a single sensor or maybe two or three. And what we were able to do with this for a very specific ecosystem in Brazil that has, as you can see from the photographs on the right, very intense land cover changes from mining to intensive agriculture to forest clearing to the world's fourth largest hydroelectric dam, is to understand how those land cover changes have impacted one of the most biodiverse areas of the river. And the species that you see in the center are the ones that are endemic to this region and really struggle with the kinds of changes we see in the landscape. But interestingly, this particular change in the landscape is really missing from many of the global data sets. So using these CubeSats, we were able to look at sort of before and after change and get a very precise measure of how the landscape, how the inundation has affected the various kinds of habitats. So the dark blue you see is the area that was flooded after the hydropower reservoir went into operation. And the light blue was then the original course of the river. And then to really determine metrics of which species are affected and by how much. And then the last case study here is much more precise, looking at drones with very specific types of sensors on board that allow us to determine very precisely the kinds of materials or vegetation species on the ground. And this is part of a larger initiative called the Canadian Airborne Biodiversity Observatory, where we are looking at how ecosystems are going to be adapting to global change, such as climate change, land cover, nitrogen, and invasive species. And so for an area on the west coast of Canada, a very unique ecosystem of which there's only about 5% of it remaining. It's called the Garry Oak Meadow. We use these to first of all get a true lifelike three-dimensional representation of that ecosystem. So we have a full digital reconstruction of all of the trees and so the meadow species around it. And then with our very specialized cameras, we could get these data sets that have a vast amount of information that allows us to look at vegetation traits, so how much chlorophyll or nitrogen, what kind of species are present, which areas are under stress, which areas are more healthy. And this allows us to ask very precise questions about how that ecosystem is responding to the various threats that are acting upon it. Thank you. I believe that's the end of my time.
Thank you very much, Margaret, for a fascinating talk. I've got lots of questions. So we'll move to the second speaker, Professor Tami Pereg-Barnea in the Department of Physics. And she is an expert in superconductivity and nanomaterials. And so over to you, Tami.
Okay, hi, thank you for the introduction and thank you all for being here. Let me just make this screen a bit bigger. Oh, technical issues. Okay, so I am a member of the physics department. I do theory of condensed matter, which means that I don't have a lab, but I try to describe things that happen in the lab. I do condensed matter, but I think of myself as a quantum materials researcher. Some examples are topological systems. These are relatively new and very exciting fields. Graphene, so a honeycomb lattice of carbon atoms, the first ever truly two-dimensional system, and superconductivity, one of my favorite things to talk about, and that's why today I'm going to focus on superconductivity. So if you want to talk about superconductivity, let's talk about what's conductivity. So we all get electricity from Hydro-Quebec. And what is electricity? Well, current is basically motion of electrons inside your conductors. And the more electrons you have, the more conductance, but also the faster they go, the more conductance you have or the more current you have. So you might think of an electron as this little tennis ball that I'm seeing here. You might think of it as flowing like water inside a pipe, maybe something like that. But actually an electron inside a conductor is going more or less like that. So it is drifting in the direction of the voltage you put on your conductor, but it has many, many collisions. And the reason it has collisions is because there are many electrons. They collide with each other and they collide with the atoms that they left behind. So each atom contributes some electrons to the conduction C, but then they have to do this correlated motion, but they're not good at coordination and they all collide. These collisions make us lose a lot of energy. This is what heats up your conductors. And in some cases, when there's too much current, your copper wire might melt and then you need to replace it. A superconductor, on the other hand, can carry electrons without these collisions. So we're not
Tami, we lost your audio there.
lowers, and resistance is the opposite of conductance. It's how much resistance there is to carry the current, how much energy is lost. But for a superconductor, you go down, but at some point, at some critical temperature Tc, the resistance drops exactly to 0. And from that point on, at low temperature, you have a perfect conductor. Moreover, there's what we call the Meissner effect. A superconductor is not just a perfect conductor, it's also a perfect diamagnet, which means that if you cool it below Tc, it expels from it. But how come this happens? This all happens because of quantum mechanics. In classical mechanics, energy and momentum are continuous variables. If you know a little bit of physics, you know that the energy goes like half mv squared for kinetic energy. So if you run faster, your energy is higher. In quantum mechanics, not all states are possible, and that's why some of the collisions might not be possible. For example, a harmonic oscillator now I can talk about a collision. Classically, you would think of two tennis balls just colliding and going in different directions. So they start with some momentum. Each of them has a momentum. There's some collision. and then they each forget the momentum they started with, and they redistribute their energy and momentum, and they go in different directions. Quantum mechanically, it might be that the final state of the collision is simply not allowed because it's not in the set of quantized energies or quantized momenta that the system has. So this is more or less what happens in a superconduction. So if the final state is not possible, you'll just get no collisions. The electrons will go through each other as if they don't see each other. Now that might seem very unintuitive, but it does happen in quantum mechanics because the whole notion of a particle is very different in quantum mechanics. We also think of it as a wave. It has probability to be somewhere. It's not definitely here or there. And that's why we can think of collisions actually not occurring. And I want to finish by saying 2 weeks ago, I gave a public lecture from my home, and my kids got to do a demonstration for me. And let's see if it works here. So what we have is a Petri dish with YBCO, which is a high TC superconductor. It's submerged in liquid nitrogen, and this cube above it is a magnet that we have this demo in the physics department. We have many of them, and even a train with a superconductor. But you can see that we can put the magnet above, but it just doesn't fall on the superconductor. It levitates above it. So my kids and I had fun playing with that. And with that, I want to finish, and I can answer questions after the talk. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Tami. That was really interesting, and that video was pretty amazing. Thank you. So the next speaker is Professor Jérôme Waldispühl in the School of Computer Science, and he's interested in a bunch of different things. He's interested in computational molecular biology. I think he's into gaming as well, and he's also into citizen science. So over to you, Jérôme.
Thank you, John. Indeed, my lab primarily, I'm working on structural RNA bioinformatics. But since I arrived at McGill 10 years ago, I work in trying to build framework to involve gamers into real scientific research. So can you imagine that there's approximately, we reach 3 billion gamers worldwide in upcoming years. Almost 60% of the population is playing video games in Canada, almost 90% if we just consider teenagers. That's a lot of work for us. Every time you're playing every time you're playing a video game, you're solving a problem. So why not doing this for a good cause and the real scientific problems? So instead of speaking and presenting my project, I will play a video trailer of the last project we launched last year with the Gearbox software company. And I'd be happy to take questions about it. And that should give you a good taste of what we're doing here.
Hey folks, this is Mayim Bialik, actor, PhD scientist, researcher, and your favorite person. Today, I'm here to talk to you about video games and science, and how we can grab both by their necks and make them kiss, consensually. Long story short, by playing Borderlands 3, you can contribute to real-world scientific research, as in data that helps real people in meat space. Speaking of meat, did you know that more than half the cells in our bodies are alien? Only 43% of our cells are of human origin. The rest belong to foreign microbes. These microbes have a massive impact on our body's health. The more we study microbes, the more we can learn about the accumulation of meat and existential terror that is the human body. These microbes are made up of DNA, just like us. Each microbe has its own special DNA signature, and similar species of microbes have similar DNA. If we could sequence all the different species of microbes found in the human body, which, remember, make up more than half of the cells in our body, we'd learn a ton about ourselves. To that end, the Microsetta Initiative collected tens of thousands of samples of, to use the scientific term, doo-doo. extracted the DNA of the microbes inside, and sequenced it. Now we just need to organize this data. Unfortunately, though computers excel at certain tasks like crunching numbers or tracking down specific pornography, they're not so good at organizing DNA information. See, different species of microbes have similar but not quite identical DNA. That means mapping their sequences can be kind of ambiguous. The computer makes lots of small mistakes that can corrupt downstream analysis. Which brings us back to video games. So we've got several million sequences that are each 150 nucleotides long that are riddled with small errors from the computer analysis. How can we get rid of all these errors? With your help. We've taken the millions of DNA sequences and broken them down into bite-sized puzzles that you can play and solve inside Borderlands 3. And try not to think about the fact that the DNA came from human excrement when I use phrases like bite-sized. By playing Borderlands Science inside Borderlands 3, you'll be directly helping our scientists organize and compare this dung data. The game is simple. You'll be confronted with different strands of DNA, each made up of individual tiles. It's your job to place as many of these tiles as possible in their appropriate row while matching the colors. It's not always possible to line everything up perfectly, but that's okay. By playing the game and matching the sequences, you'll also be identifying the errors in our computer analysis and helping scientists across the planet build a better algorithm for the future. And since all this research is open access, the entire scientific community will benefit from it. This research could directly lead to a universal catalog of all known microbes, which could lead to new breakthroughs in food, medicine, exercise. The sky's the limit. And it all starts with you playing a video game. But if the pursuit of knowledge isn't enough of an encouragement to sort through virtual butt microbes, then fear not. Playing Borderlands Science earns you in-game currency you can spend on booster items for your characters. Oh, and this is all totally free. Just activate the Borderlands Science machine on Sanctuary 3 and sort some gut microbes.
So that's it. That was my presentation made done by Gebox. I'd be happy to take a question later on, of course.
Thank you, Jérôme. That was very good. And it reminded me of Tetris.
That was inspiration.
Okay. Right. Okay. And I just want to make one comment before we move to Nicholas, our next speaker. We as professors, you might not appreciate it, or you might. What we do a lot of, the reason we do it is because we find it fun. We find our research fun. That's a large driver for us, as I think you can see from the three presenters already so far. So it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Nicholas Vieira in the Department of Physics. He's a student in the Department of Physics, and he's going to talk about the McGill Physics Hackathon. And rumor has it that the most recent hackathon last fall was extremely successful. So over to you, Nicholas.
Yeah, I heard those rumors as well. Okay, so let me just share my screen. Okay, great. So hi, everyone. As John said, my name is Nick, and I am a second-year master's student studying astrophysics. But what I'm here to talk about today is something I do on the side. I'm also an outreach coordinator, and I was one of the organizers of the 2020 McGill Physics Hackathon, which is what I'm here to talk about. So for folks who don't know what a hackathon is, last November 7th and 8th, 2020, we organized this hackathon, which is essentially a 24-hour event, a sort of challenge for students to put together any sort of simulation, visualization, web app, tool, whatever, which incorporates the physical sciences. That's the only rule, is that it has to involve physics of some kind. And the focus of this event is really to develop teamwork skills, the ability to execute a project, learning how to code, which is just a super useful skill in general, learning how to communicate your ideas, and it sounds cheesy, but also to have fun. That is, an important thing as well. And so as you might have guessed, one of the challenges of 2020 that a lot of us are facing is how to bring this event, which usually happens in person, as you can see from these photos from 2019, how to bring that event online and how to host it remotely and still have people be engaged and stuff like that. And so we had to take a few interesting strategies this year to do that. And so I'll just mention a few of them. And so one of them was our Codetober series of pre-event workshops. And so we had that this year, and we really beefed it up this year. And the point of that is to give students a bit more confidence about their ability to code before the event, and also just to teach them, you know, a bunch of different skills, whether or not they end up attending the hackathon. In addition to our big 24-hour challenge this year, we also had some mini challenges with really clear, well-defined goals. And the idea behind that was that sometimes your project's not going well, and rather than giving up and becoming disengaged, you can take a break and do a mini challenge instead, and have some fun doing that. The choice of venue was also important. And so for that, we used a service called Discord, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And this enabled us to really form this, what felt like a really tight-knit community for a weekend in November. And I think that I and a lot of other people really appreciated that sense of community that we had. And to that effect, we also had students given the opportunity to take breaks and play games like Pictionary and stuff like that. But perhaps most importantly, we asked students to share pictures of their pets. And I have a cat, and I think anyone else who has a cat knows that one of our favorite things to do is to show people pictures of our cat, especially when they didn't ask. And so people really appreciated this, and I did as well. So just a few numbers to show off how this event went that we're super pleased with. So this event was our biggest yet, just in terms of the sheer number of people there. And it was our most international event. We had students from Canada, Brazil, the US, India, New Zealand, Switzerland, and Mexico. So almost every continent on the planet. Not Antarctica, but maybe next year. And another couple numbers that I think are really neat are we had almost 90% of attendees at their first hackathon, which was something that we were really honored to be doing for them. And about 70% of students at the event were Cégep or undergraduate students. And that was also super important to us because that's a group that we really try and target so that they can develop these skills. So what I want to do now is show off a couple projects that really blew me away, although almost all of the projects that people submitted were just amazing this year. And so this project was a project called Space Probe. And what this is doing is it's looking at a sheet of metal, and in real time, it's detecting small holes in that sheet of metal using computer vision and artificial intelligence. And the application for something like this would be to look for things like micro impacts on space probes, satellites, rovers in real time. And so this is something that could actually be used in the real world. And we were totally blown away by the fact that a team of 3 students put this together in 24 hours. Another really neat project was this project on donut electrodynamics. And so what this project, what these students did was they made this tool where you have a torus, a donut, and you can put charges on the torus. So think of like, particles or whatever. And you can have those particles interact and move around. And what's really, really cool about this is that it was built into a web application. And so you can actually go onto this donut and put the charges wherever you want yourself and just let it run and see what happens. And so there's a link there that I can share later if people want to try it out. It's super fun. All submitted projects are up on something called a dev post. There's almost 40 projects, and I encourage you all to browse them. It's really amazing what some students are able to do. And if you want to learn some more about the hackathon, we were recently in the McGill Reporter. Fergus Grieve wrote a really awesome article that I encourage you all to read. And above all, I hope that this sounds like fun to some of you, and I hope that we see some of you at the 2021 edition. Hopefully I've communicated that this is really open to anybody. Anybody can participate, and the point is just to learn and have fun. One last thing, shameless plug. If anyone wants to ask me about my research afterwards, I also work in a really phenomenal research group, and I'm very privileged. And so I'd be happy to talk about that as well in addition to the hackathon. That's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick. And you're right. The astrophysics at McGill is a big deal. And I have to say that presentation, that was inspiring. That was great. That was really amazing. And I would like to thank all 4 speakers because it shows us all the amazing and the amazing research, the diverse research that goes on at this great university, where it was really a pleasure